Well, welcome everyone to this takeaway session of the conference. Don't worry, I'm not going to try and summarize everything that's just been said over the last day. I counted, we had 7 different panels, I think over 25 speakers. So even if I give you 1 bullet per speaker, I'll be here for a little while. But I think what we have got out of today's session is some great insights on the different trends, the different drivers which are affecting European security as we move through the 21st century. And what I thought I'd do is just try and give you a couple of takeaways in 3 different blocks. I think the first of all, that a lot of the different panels gave us some insights about where we are at the moment in this very unstable environment. We had a lot of talk about paradigm shifts. The war is changing everything. We have a new unstable global order, a more multipolar world, and a very different sense of where we are than perhaps we did at the beginning of the century. I think one of the panelists said we've just had the best 33 years of our lives, and the next period is going to be perhaps slightly less predictable. A lot of talk about the clash of systems and the need to prepare for long-term instability. I think that was the message I got from this sort of block of issues, that things are not going to go back to normal, so we've got to prepare and be ready for a new way of seeing things and a new way of doing things. And in that sense, quite a lot of deep impacts that we see, and people were signaling different things. There's a risk of decoupling, less prosperity as we try and make this twin transition, the risk of a rise of authoritarianism and a crisis of democracy, the fact that the concept of security has become much broader, not just covering traditional military security, but all kinds of other concepts, hybrid threats, disinformation, disruptive technology, nuclear threats coming back into the picture. We've seen the weaponization of everything. This is a phrase that came back from a number of panelists. And the risk of growing dependencies, both strategic dependencies, but also security dependencies. And I think the final point in this first block of issues is that, all of this comes at a cost. It comes at a cost, both, I think, an economic cost, a social cost, a democratic cost. And this is something that we need to take into account. I think Klaus Welle made the point that up until now we've maybe been focused on price. Price was king, and now security is the new king, but this comes at a cost. So quite a lot of diverse and quite destabilizing drivers impacting us. And if we go into the next section, which is really, so what do we do about all of this? I think this is where I got the richest input from today's session, from the very high level. How do we preserve our democratic values? We were hearing about that in the last panel. How are we attentive to our democratic values? How do we ensure that we are attentive to the tensions and the trade-offs? How do we handle as well information manipulation? I think a very rich set of interventions there, and some quite practical takeaways about things that we could actually do and should actually do to try to tackle these problems of information manipulation and promoting democratic values in that space. But then also in the morning session, we heard quite a lot of very practical takeaways from the Prime Minister of Croatia onwards about the kind of things we need to be doing to deal with the crisis that we're facing. So strong and unified actions, maintaining solidarity and unity, being convergent, not dissipated in our action, being careful to avoid new dependencies as we tackle the current crisis, and being true to the course that we've set ourselves. We're dealing with a crisis, but we mustn't forget that we have to tackle climate change, and we have to optimize the digital transition that we're benefiting from. And in and amongst all of that, we had a lot of discussion about the international scene, the positioning of the EU, EU and NATO, EU and the US, EU and Asia, and quite a lot of how does all that interaction work. I heard a message very strongly this morning that the European Union has come through the crisis quite well, but that the member states need to raise their game. Some participants were talking about quite a long discussion about the the procurement challenges that the defense and industrial challenges are facing, are bringing to us at the moment, and how we need to raise our game and do better there around supply chains, around defense spending and building our industrial base, and also about the tensions and the trade-offs in the relationships between the US and China. One note of optimism in that block, I mean, it wasn't discussed at great length, but can the climate crisis, or indeed the war in Ukraine, help provide some of the international glue that we need to get us to a better place? So the crisis is challenging us, but perhaps it also in some ways offers some pathways to greater integration, if only we can seize them. So a lot of different ideas swirling around there about what we can do. And then the third block for me was, well, how does all of this connect with our core activity in the foresight community? And how do we take these drivers, these trends, all of this stuff that's going on, and how do we then use the lens of foresight to help the policymakers and the politicians to actually respond to all of this? I repeat I think the great line from the Croatian Prime Minister: predicting the future is hard, but preparing for it is necessary. I think that's a good strapline for our foresight activity. And I took away, on the one hand, I mean, it's good to see such a high level of political engagement, wanting to engage with the foresight community, and I think a very rich panel of international participants discussing with us today. And the message was quite consistent. We need anticipatory governance. We need to invest in creating this culture of foresight. And foresight needs to be strategic. It needs to lead to action and to change, and not just be something that we do in an academic cloister. And I think perhaps then the final takeaway for me in all of this is that if we take as a starting point that we're in a period of quite long-term instability and things aren't necessarily going to go back to normal, the challenge then for the foresight community is how can we help to use our tools to shape the world looking ahead to hopefully when the conflict is over, and we want to define these new baselines, and we want to define new ways of doing things, and how do we use that to bounce forward in a sustainable and resilient way. And I think that's something that we're also going to be picking up in tomorrow's session, and that's where I want to leave you with the invitation to rejoin us tomorrow at 9 o'clock, where we'll be having a variety of panels. I won't list them all for you, but the first main panel tomorrow is exactly about dealing with a complex, dynamic, and uncertain world to secure Europe's future. Which tools for policymakers? So there we can discuss what kind of tools we've got to try and deal with all the challenges we've heard about today. So with that, with many thanks to all of our speakers, all of our panelists, and to you in the audience for joining us today, I wish you all a very good evening, and thank you very much.